The night had faded softly into the quiet hush of morning. A pale light began to touch the hills, gentle as a whisper, warm as a promise. The air was cool, carrying the scent of olive trees and the distant sound of doves calling from their nests. The world felt still, as if heaven itself was holding its breath, waiting for something holy to awaken. In that soft dawn, Jesus walked along the narrow path outside the village. The earth beneath his feet was cool, and every step he took seemed to bring new life to the ground. He looked toward the horizon. The sun's first rays stretched across the sky like threads of gold, weaving a new day. He smiled, as though he could already see the miracles hidden in the hours ahead. Everywhere he went, people stirred. Mothers rose early to fetch water from the well. Children's laughter echoed faintly through the still air. Fishermen returned from the sea, their nets heavy with the night's catch. And when they saw him, some paused, because something about him felt different. He did not walk with pride or power, but with peace, deep and quiet, the kind that made your heart soften without knowing why. A young boy carrying a basket of bread stopped and stared. Jesus met his eyes and smiled, and in that moment, the boy felt as if the light of morning had entered his chest. As the sun rose higher, the small village awoke fully. There was chatter, movement, and life. But near the well, a woman stood apart from the others. Her face was weary, her eyes dim. She had been ill for many years, so long that hope had become a stranger to her heart. People passed her by politely, but she could feel the distance they kept. Then she saw him. Jesus approached slowly, the light of dawn glinting softly in his hair, and when he looked at her, it was not pity in his eyes, but understanding. He spoke in a tone that was quiet and strong, like the sound of waves meeting the shore. "Daughter," he said, "you have carried your pain for so long. Let it rest now. Your faith has healed you." She felt warmth spread through her body, like sunlight melting away years of cold. Her trembling hands steadied, her eyes filled with tears, and for the first time in many seasons, she smiled. Around her, people murmured. Some gasped, others whispered his name. But Jesus simply looked at the woman and nodded gently, as though this moment belonged not to him, but to love itself. The morning of miracles had begun. Farther down the road, near the open fields, a crowd had gathered by a small wedding house. The sound of laughter and music floated gently in the air, mixed with the aroma of freshly baked bread and sweet figs. It was a day of joy, a celebration of love and union. Guests talked and danced, children ran with ribbons through the courtyard, and mothers clapped their hands in rhythm with the drums. But soon, whispers of worry began to move through the crowd. The wine had run out. The hosts were embarrassed, the servants confused, and the laughter began to fade into uneasy murmurs. Mary, the mother of Jesus, stood nearby. She looked toward her son, calm and steady, with a knowing light in her eyes. She spoke softly to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Jesus looked around and saw the empty jars standing by the wall. They were plain, made of stone, used for washing before the meal. He placed his hand upon one jar, and his voice was like the hush of wind through the olive trees. "Fill them with water," he said. The servants obeyed. They filled each jar to the brim, water glistening like liquid glass under the morning sun. Then he spoke again, his words simple, yet carrying a weight that stirred the very air. "Now," he said, "draw some out and take it to the master of the feast." The servant did so. He lifted a cup, his hands trembling slightly. When the cup touched the lips of the master, the man's eyes widened with wonder. "This is the finest wine," he exclaimed. "Why have you saved it until now?" There was laughter again, and relief, and joy that rippled through the courtyard like sunlight dancing upon the surface of water. Jesus stepped quietly aside, his smile gentle, his eyes filled with peace. He looked toward the sky, as though listening to a song only he could hear. Around him, the celebration came alive once more, music rising softly, children spinning in delight, and hearts filling with warmth. No one truly understood what had happened, but in that moment, something within every soul felt lighter. They could feel, without knowing why, that love itself had touched their day. The emphasis, the miracle, was not about wine, but about renewal, about turning emptiness into joy, and reminding every heart that grace can fill what life has emptied. As the sun moved westward, the golden light fell across the courtyard, wrapping everything in warmth. Mary watched her son from a distance, her smile quiet and full of faith. The first miracle had come to pass, and the light of Jesus continued to grow, gentle, steady, unstoppable. Later that day, Jesus sat beneath a wide fig tree. The branches arched like gentle arms above him, shading the ground with cool, dappled light. Children gathered around, their laughter soft as birdsong, and their eyes bright with curiosity. He told them stories, simple, kind, full of meaning. One little girl, sitting close by his feet, asked in a whisper, "Why do you smile so much, teacher?" Jesus looked at her, his eyes shining with warmth. "Because every smile is a seed of light," he said softly, "and when it grows, the whole world becomes brighter." The girl giggled and reached up to hand him a small wildflower. He accepted it gently, tucking it into the pocket of his robe. The children clapped, their hearts light as air. That moment was small, yet it held more truth than all the grand speeches of kings. Love, given freely, had become the greatest miracle of all. As evening came, the colors of the sky softened into gold and rose. The air cooled again, carrying the scent of salt and the faraway murmur of the sea. Jesus walked alone along the hillside. The world glowed with peace, a peace not born of power, but of stillness. He paused, looking over the fields and distant rooftops. A soft wind stirred the grass, brushing against his robe like the touch of heaven itself. He whispered a prayer, not loud, but deep and filled with gratitude. "Father, thank you for this day, for every soul that opened like a flower to the light, for every heart that dared to hope again. May your love be the dawn that never ends." He lifted his eyes to the horizon, where the last light of day met the calm of night, and for a moment the whole earth seemed to rest in the glow of that eternal promise. The stars appeared one by one, each a quiet echo of heaven's song. A mother tucked her child into bed, a fisherman whispered a prayer of thanks, and a once weary woman smiled into the dark, knowing that love had found her again. As you listen now, let that same peace settle gently over you. Feel the warmth of that first morning light touching your heart. There is no rush, no worry, no fear, only the steady, holy rhythm of breathing and the quiet knowing that miracles are still being born with every sunrise. The morning of miracles had ended, yet its light lives on within you. The next morning rose quiet and silver. A soft mist drifted above the waters of Galilee, wrapping the world in a blanket of calm. The gentle sound of waves brushed the shore, and seabirds circled lazily in the cool air. Jesus walked slowly along the narrow path beside the sea. His sandals pressed lightly into the damp sand, leaving behind a trail that the waves soon washed away. The gentle breeze touched his face, carrying the scent of salt and wild thyme from the cliffs. He breathed it in deeply, as if filling his soul with the peace of creation. Nearby, fishermen were mending their nets. Their hands were rough and strong, their eyes tired but kind. They spoke in quiet tones, pausing only to glance toward the man who walked by the sea. One of them, Simon, looked up from his boat. He had heard stories of this teacher, this man who spoke of love and peace, who healed the broken and gave courage to the weary. Jesus came closer. The sunlight shimmered softly upon the water, and the air seemed to still. He spoke gently, his voice carrying over the rhythm of the waves. "Simon," he said, "come with me. I will teach you to fish for souls, not just for the sea." Simon paused, his heart beating quietly. He looked at his nets, heavy with the weight of his old life, and then at the calm face of the man before him. Slowly, he set his nets down. The waves lapped gently at his feet, as if blessing his choice. He stepped forward, leaving behind the only life he had ever known. And so began the journey beside the sea, not a journey of distance, but of faith. As they walked, the sun rose higher, spreading gold across the waves. The two men moved in quiet understanding, the teacher and the fisherman, side by side. The world seemed to listen. Even the wind whispered softly through the reeds, as if carrying their steps towards something holy. Along the shore, children ran after the tide, laughing as the foam touched their toes. One of them waved at Jesus, and he smiled, raising his hand in gentle greeting. His smile was the light of peace, simple, steady, and unending. The road beside the sea was not only made of sand and stone, but of hearts learning how to hope again. As the morning deepened, more people began to gather along the shore. They had heard of the man who healed the sick, who spoke of heaven as if it were right beside them. Jesus looked upon the crowd with quiet compassion. He could see their weariness, their longing, their silent prayers carried upon the wind. He stepped into a small boat that was tied near the sand and asked Simon to push it gently from the shore. The water rippled softly beneath them, reflecting the gold of the rising sun. When the boat drifted a little way out, he sat down. The sea became his temple, the sky his roof, and the hearts before him his congregation. His voice carried easily over the still water. "Blessed are those who listen," he said, "for in the stillness the soul can hear the voice of peace." The crowd grew silent. Even the waves seemed to hush, as if the ocean itself leaned closer to hear. He told them a parable. His words fell like soft rain on fertile ground. "A fisherman once cast his net into the sea," he began, "and when he drew it back, it held both small and great fish. He kept the good and released the rest. So it is with the heart. What we choose to keep becomes the truth we live." The crowd listened, their eyes shining with quiet wonder. They did not feel preached to, they felt understood. A soft wind stirred across the surface of the lake, and sunlight danced in 1,000 tiny ripples. The boat rocked gently like a cradle upon the water. Jesus lifted his hand toward the sea. "Do you see how calm it is now?" he asked. "There was wind before, and waves that rose and fell, yet the sea found its stillness again. So too must your hearts. For peace is not the absence of storms, but the quiet that remains within." The words settled deeply into the minds of those listening. Some closed their eyes, letting the sound of water and voice become one. Along the edges of the shore, mothers held their children close. Old men rested upon their walking sticks. All felt the same gentle stirring, the soft awakening of something holy within. The sea shimmered with light, and for a moment, the world seemed reborn. Even the gulls above circled slowly, their wings silent in the calm air. Jesus smiled, watching the reflection of heaven upon the water. Simon looked at him quietly, realizing that the greatest teaching was not in the words alone, but in the peace that followed them. The lesson of the sea was simple: to trust the calm after the storm, and to carry the light wherever one walked. As the afternoon waned, the sun began to lean toward the western hills. The golden light shimmered upon the water, and long shadows stretched gently across the shore. The crowd began to drift away, each heart quietly full. Some walked homeward in silence, holding the words they had heard like small flames against the dark. Jesus remained by the sea. The waves rolled in softly, washing against the sand with a rhythm like breathing. He stepped to the edge, the cool water touching his feet. Simon stood a few paces behind, watching. He did not speak. He did not need to. The quiet said everything. Jesus looked out over the wide expanse of water. The surface was smooth now, as if the sea itself had listened and found rest. He whispered a prayer, soft and steady as the tide. "Father, may every heart that seeks peace find it within your love. Let the weary find rest. Let the lost be found. And let this world remember that calm follows every storm." A hush seemed to settle over the earth. The birds quieted, the wind slowed, and even the light upon the waves grew still. For a long moment, Everything was peace. The kind of peace that comes not from the absence of sound, but from the presence of something eternal. Then a soft voice broke the silence. It was a child, one who had been sitting at the far edge of the crowd. "Teacher," the child called, "will you walk this way again tomorrow?" Jesus turned, smiling. "Yes," he said gently, "for every morning the sea awaits the light." The child smiled back, running to meet his mother along the path. Jesus watched them go, the joy in his eyes soft as twilight. The sky began to fade from gold to blue, from blue to the deep violet of approaching night. The first star appeared, shining faintly above the quiet hills. Simon joined him at the shore. Together they stood in silence, listening to the steady rhythm of the waves. Neither spoke. Their hearts spoke enough. Jesus turned once more toward the sea, and his reflection shimmered upon the surface, half light, half shadow. He whispered once more, "Peace be with you." The words lingered in the air, soft as the sea breeze, carrying far beyond the horizon. The waves answered with their eternal rhythm, "Come and go, come and go," like the heartbeat of the world. As night fell, the moon rose gently above the water, painting the sea in silver. Jesus turned from the shore, walking back along the path, his steps light, his presence calm. The road beside the sea had ended for the day, but its peace remained, flowing quietly within every heart that listened. The sea rests now, the world breathes in silence, and the light continues to walk beside you. The next day dawned warm and gentle. Sunlight streamed through the clouds like ribbons of gold, touching the earth with quiet grace. The air smelled of olive trees and distant rain. Jesus walked through a small village nestled among the hills. The streets were narrow, lined with stone walls and flowering vines. People stepped from their doorways to greet him, their faces filled with hope. At the edge of the square, a young boy sat with his head bowed. In his hands, he held a small, broken jug. Jesus knelt beside him. "What troubles you, child?" The boy looked up, eyes full of tears. "It was my mother's," he said softly. "I dropped it. I tried to fix it, but it will never hold water again." Jesus took the jug in his hands, turning it gently in the light. The cracks shimmered like fine lines of silver. "Sometimes," he said, "what is broken can still hold light, and light, my child, is greater than water." The boy smiled through his tears, and for the first time that day, his heart felt whole again. He held the jug close, as if it had become something sacred. Jesus stood and turned to the small crowd gathering nearby. He could see the faces, men and women weary from the world, children curious and bright. He spoke gently, his voice calm as morning light. "Love," he said, "is not measured by perfection, but by the willingness to care. A cracked jug can still hold light, just as a wounded heart can still give love. The people listened, some nodding quietly, others closing their eyes to let his words sink deep. To love, he continued, is to see the beauty that others overlook. It is to forgive the past and to believe in what can bloom again. A soft wind moved through the square, carrying the scent of jasmine and dust. The words seemed to hang in the air, glowing like lanterns in the heart. Then Jesus said, "Let me tell you a story." The people grew still, waiting for the parable that was to come. And so began the first of the parables of love, stories not only to be heard, but to be lived. Jesus looked across the small crowd, his eyes calm, his presence peaceful. The air was still, as if the world itself leaned closer to listen. There were once two lamps, he began, burning side by side in a quiet home. The people leaned in, their faces soft in the glow of the setting sun. One lamp burned bright and strong, proud of its light. The other flickered gently, small and humble. When the wind came, the proud lamp said, "Hold your flame tighter, or the darkness will take you." The listeners smiled softly, following every word. Jesus continued, "But the small lamp said, 'When the wind comes, I will share my flame with you. Together we will stay alight.'" The people listened in stillness. The lesson was already blooming within their hearts. "The wind did come," he said softly, "and it blew hard through the room. The proud lamp's flame trembled and at last went out. But the small lamp bent low, shielding its light. Then, with love and care, it shared its fire again." A mother in the crowd drew her child closer. The story felt like a lullaby, simple yet full of warmth. Jesus smiled gently. "Love," he said, "is the flame that gives itself away. When you share it, you do not lose light, you create more of it." The crowd sat silent for a moment, hearing the sea whisper in the distance, feeling the truth settle softly in their souls. An old man raised his voice, his tone trembling but kind. "Teacher," he said, "how do we keep our flame from fading?" Jesus turned toward him, his expression tender. "By kindness," he said. "Every act of love is a drop of oil in your lamp. Forgive freely, give quietly, speak gently, and your flame will never die." The man bowed his head, tears glistening in his eyes. A soft murmur of peace moved through the crowd. Jesus lifted his gaze toward the hills. The sky above had turned the color of soft rose, and the first star blinked faintly in the twilight. "You are the light of the world," he whispered. "Do not hide your flame. Let it shine, even in the smallest moments, for light shared is love multiplied."
A calm fell over the gathering, deep and unbroken. The air itself seemed to glow with gentle warmth. That night, 2 lamps burned side by side in every heart that listened. Their light, the light of love, would never fade again.
As evening fell, the sky deepened into shades of violet and rose. The people lingered still, unwilling to leave the peace that surrounded them. Jesus sat upon a smooth stone near the olive grove. The sound of crickets filled the air, steady and soft, like a lullaby. A woman stepped forward from the crowd, her hands clasped tightly together. Her voice trembled. "Teacher," she whispered, "I have hurt someone I love. I wish to forgive myself, but I do not know how." Jesus looked at her kindly, his eyes reflecting the last light of the sun. "Forgiveness," he said, "is not forgetting what has been done. It is remembering with love. It is seeing the wound and choosing to heal it with compassion." The woman wept quietly, and Jesus reached out, resting his hand upon hers. The crowd watched in stillness, as if the moment itself were holy. "When you forgive," he continued, "you free 2 hearts, yours and the one you held in pain. Love cannot breathe where anger lives. Let it go, and the air will become light again." A cool wind brushed through the trees, carrying away the heaviness of sorrow. Leaves rustled softly, whispering peace into the night. Another voice spoke, this time from a young man sitting at the edge of the group. "But what if they do not forgive me?" Jesus smiled gently. "Then love them still. Forgive without waiting for return. The measure of love is not in what we receive, but in what we give freely." The young man bowed his head, a single tear tracing his cheek. Around him, the night seemed to glow with quiet mercy. Every heart there carried something heavy, and every heart felt a little lighter. It was as though invisible chains had fallen away one by one. Jesus stood and looked to the stars above. They shimmered gently, countless lights reflected in the calm of his eyes. "Love one another," he said softly. "When you love, you heal. When you forgive, you set the world free. And when you rest in peace, heaven is already here." A deep hush fell. Someone began to hum a gentle tune, low, slow, and full of gratitude. The stars seemed to move closer, the earth breathing with them in quiet rhythm. The sound of the sea carried faintly from far away, steady and eternal. Jesus closed his eyes, whispering a final prayer. "Father, let this love remain. Let it grow in the hearts of all who seek peace. Let every act of kindness become a spark that lights another flame." The people bowed their heads. The air shimmered with calm. It was not silence, it was peace. And so ended the night of the parables of love. But the stories lived on, whispered softly in dreams, glowing quietly within every soul that listened. Rest now. Let love fill your breath. You are forgiven.
You are loved. You are home.
The morning was quiet and cool. A soft golden light spread across the hills, touching every leaf, every stone with gentle warmth. Jesus walked slowly along the winding path, his sandals brushing against the dew-covered grass. The world was waking, birds calling softly from the olive trees, their songs mingling with the whisper of the wind. A small group followed him, men, women, and children, drawn by a peace they could not explain. They carried nothing with them but hope and a longing to hear his words. When they reached the top of the hill, the Sea of Galilee shimmered in the distance, silver under the rising sun. The air was clear, full of quiet wonder. Jesus sat upon a smooth stone and looked upon those who had gathered. Their eyes waited, open and gentle, their hearts ready to receive. He began to speak, his voice soft yet strong, a voice that carried both comfort and courage. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. The wind moved gently through the grass. The people bowed their heads, letting the words fall like sunlight upon their souls. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. The quiet deepened, and a mother held her child a little closer. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. A shepherd standing at the edge of the crowd smiled softly, his staff resting against the earth. Each blessing drifted across the hillside like a warm breeze, touching every heart that listened. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. The people looked at one another, some with tears, others with quiet awe. They had never heard words so soft yet so powerful. Jesus paused, lifting his eyes toward the sun now rising higher above the sea. The light touched his face, and for a moment the hill seemed to glow. And so began the hill of blessings, a morning where heaven's light met the hearts of mankind.
The crowd sat quietly upon the hillside, wrapped in the calm of the morning. The sunlight rested upon their faces, and every word that Jesus spoke seemed to plant peace within their hearts. He continued softly, his voice steady as the wind through the olive trees. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. A gentle murmur moved through the crowd, like the sound of leaves in a quiet forest. A woman wiped a tear from her cheek, her heart remembering the grace she once received. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. The words shimmered in the air, clear and bright as morning light on water. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God." The people listened in stillness. Even the breeze paused, as though heaven itself wished to hear. Jesus looked toward the youngest among them, a small girl sitting near her mother, holding a basket of wildflowers. He smiled and said, "Let me tell you a story." He said, "There was once a traveler who walked a long and dusty road. He carried a heavy bag, and each step grew harder than the last. Along the path, he met a child who offered him a drink of water and a single flower. The crowd smiled softly, picturing the small act of kindness. He continued. The traveler took the flower and placed it in his pocket. Though it was small, it reminded him that love was near, and his journey became lighter. A calm silence settled. Even the sea far below seemed to hush. Jesus looked around the hillside, his eyes filled with warmth. He said, "The smallest act of kindness can become the greatest light. Never think your love too small. Every gentle thing you do shines brighter than you know." A soft sigh of peace moved through the crowd. Mothers smiled at their children, and friends exchanged quiet glances of understanding. The wind brushed through the grass again, carrying the scent of wild thyme and earth. The day had grown warm, but the hill remained peaceful and alive with spirit. "You are the light of the world," Jesus said. "A city on a hill cannot be hidden. Let your kindness be your light. Let your compassion be your flame." The people bowed their heads, feeling the glow of truth in those words. The light of love had touched them deeply. And the hill of blessings shone brighter still, not from the sun alone, but from the hearts that had begun to shine within.
The morning light grew brighter upon the hillside, yet the peace that filled the air remained soft and steady. The people listened still, every heart open, every soul quiet and awake. Jesus looked at them with gentle eyes. "Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake," he said softly, "for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." His words flowed like water over stone, calm, patient, eternal. He paused, letting the truth rest within the hearts before him. "Blessed are you when others speak against you," he continued, "for love's sake. Rejoice, for your light shines even in darkness." The wind whispered across the hilltop, carrying his voice to the farthest edge. Even the sea below seemed to listen. Jesus lifted his gaze to the horizon. The sun had risen high now, flooding the valley with golden warmth. He spoke once more, his tone calm and full of love. "Let your hearts be like this light," he said, "gentle, steady, unafraid. For love that shines from within can never be taken away." A small child reached for his hand, and he smiled, lifting the child into his arms. The people watched, their hearts overflowing with tenderness. Jesus closed his eyes then, and a hush fell over the hill. He spoke a prayer, each word slow, each syllable carrying peace. Father, thank you for this morning. Thank you for these hearts that seek peace. May they carry your light wherever they walk. Let their words heal. Let their love endure. Let their lives be a blessing to the world. The people bowed their heads, some in tears, others in stillness. The wind seemed to echo his prayer, moving gently across the hill. When he opened his eyes, the sky above was vast and bright. The people slowly began to rise, their faces soft with quiet joy. Go in peace, Jesus said. Be light wherever you go. Speak kindness, live gently, and remember, love is the greatest blessing of all. The crowd began to walk down the hill, their footsteps light, their voices low. The sound of laughter mixed with the whisper of the wind, as if heaven and earth were smiling together. Jesus watched them go, his expression full of quiet joy. Then he turned toward the sea, the sunlight resting upon his face. The hill of blessings lay behind him now, but its peace remained, carried in every heart that had listened, glowing softly within the world. And as the day faded into golden calm, a stillness fell upon the land, the stillness of love, the stillness of heaven's gentle peace. Rest now, for the light within you is the same that shone upon the hill that morning.
Evening fell softly over the Sea of Galilee. The sky turned to gold, then violet, and the water reflected every shade of peace. The disciples gathered by the shore, their voices low, their hearts calm after a long day of teaching and healing. Nearby, Jesus watched the fading light, his face quiet, his spirit at rest. A gentle wind moved across the water. The sound of small waves lapping against the boat made the world feel like a lullaby. Jesus turned to his friends and said softly, "Let us cross to the other side." They nodded, trusting his voice without question. Together, they stepped into the wooden boat. The stars were beginning to appear, small, bright candles in the vast night sky. As they rowed into deeper waters, Jesus leaned back against the stern, resting his head upon a small cushion. The gentle rocking of the boat lulled him into sleep. The disciples smiled quietly. The night was peaceful. The only sounds were the splash of oars and the whisper of wind across the water. "It will be a calm crossing tonight," said Peter softly. The others nodded, their hearts at ease. But far on the horizon, the clouds began to gather, dark, slow, and silent. The first flash of lightning flickered across the distant sky. No one noticed, not yet. The sea that had sung them to rest was beginning to stir. A wind rose suddenly, cool and sharp. The disciples lifted their heads, feeling the shift in the air. The waves began to rise. "James," Peter called, "take the sail down." They worked quickly, but the storm was already waking. The water darkened beneath them, and thunder rolled through the sky. Yet through it all, Jesus slept, calm and still. The storm had begun, but peace had not left the boat.
The wind howled suddenly across the sea, shaking the small boat as if it were a leaf upon the waves. The disciples cried out, clinging to the wooden sides. Thunder rolled through the heavens, deep and endless. Lightning split the clouds, turning the water silver for a single blinding heartbeat. "The sail! Hold the sail!" shouted John. Rain fell in heavy sheets, soaking their clothes, their faces, their fear. Peter grasped the side of the boat, his hands trembling. "The waves are too strong!" he cried. The water poured in faster now. The storm roared like a living thing, wild and without mercy. The disciples' hearts bat fast, caught between faith and fear. "Where is the teacher?" Thomas called out. They turned, and there he was. Jesus still slept at the stern, his head resting upon the small cushion, his face calm, untouched by the storm. For a moment, the disciples stared in disbelief. "Master!" cried Peter, his voice breaking through the thunder. "Do you not care that we are perishing?" Jesus opened his eyes. The storm raged around him, yet his gaze was clear, calm, full of light. He stood slowly, his robe soaked by the rain, and looked across the wild waters. His voice, when he spoke, was soft, yet it carried through the thunder like sunlight through clouds. "Peace," he said, "be still." At once, the wind began to fall. The waves sank lower, their fury fading into ripples of silver calm. The rain slowed, then stopped. The sea grew quiet, a vast mirror beneath the stars. Not a whisper of wind remained. The disciples stood frozen, their breath caught between awe and wonder. They looked around in silence. Jesus turned to them, his expression gentle, his tone filled with peace. "Why are you afraid?" he asked softly. "Do you still have no faith?" The disciples lowered their heads, their fear slowly melting into awe. Around them, the sea lay still as glass. The storm had obeyed his voice, and in its silence, their hearts began to understand that even the wind and waves knew his name. Peter looked at John, whispering softly, "Who is this, that even the sea obeys him?" John only smiled, his eyes wet with peace. The moon broke through the clouds, casting soft light over the calm water. The storm was gone, but its lesson would remain forever.
The sea was still now, vast and silent beneath the starlit sky. The air smelled of rain and peace. The disciples sat quietly in the boat, their eyes wide with wonder. The sound of their own breathing was the only thing that broke the silence. Jesus stood near the bow, his robe softly moving in the night breeze. His face was calm, radiant in the light of the fading moon. "You see," he said gently, "the storm was never stronger than your faith. It only seemed so because you looked at the waves, not at me." The disciples listened in silence. Peter lowered his gaze, the reflection of the stars shining in his tears. "Master," he whispered, "we were afraid." Jesus stepped closer and placed his hand upon Peter's shoulder. "Do not be afraid again," he said softly.
When storms rise within or around you, remember, peace lives within you, for I am with you always. The wind stirred lightly, no longer cold or cruel, but gentle, like a whisper of comfort. The disciples looked around, realizing that the same sea that had terrified them was now their mirror of peace. The sea had not changed, only their hearts had. Slowly, a light began to bloom on the horizon. Dawn was coming, golden and new, spreading warmth across the calm waters. The disciples smiled softly. "The storm is over," said John. Jesus looked toward the rising sun and replied, "Yes, and so it will always be. Every storm will end when faith awakens." They began to row once more, their strokes slow and steady. The oars dipped gently into the glassy water, leaving ripples of light behind. "Peace," Jesus said, "is not the absence of storms, but the presence of trust." The men nodded quietly, the words settling deep within their souls. None spoke again, for no words were needed. The sun climbed higher, painting the waves in gold. The storm had passed, but its memory became a promise, a reminder that love was stronger than fear. Jesus sat once more at the stern, the same place where he had slept in peace. His eyes closed gently, and a quiet smile touched his lips. The Sea of Galilee lay still beneath him, calm as a dream, endless as grace. And so the night ended, not with thunder, but with peace. Not with fear, but with faith. Not with darkness, but with light. Rest now, for even in life's storms, the calm is never far away.
Morning returned to the hills of Galilee, soft and full of gold. Dew sparkled upon the grass, and the scent of new blossoms filled the air. Jesus walked quietly through a small garden, his hands brushing against the leaves and vines. The disciples followed behind, their steps light, their hearts calm after the night's peaceful rest. Birds sang softly in the branches above. Bees drifted from flower to flower, gathering sweetness from the morning light. Jesus paused beside a patch of soil where a few tiny green shoots had begun to rise. He knelt down and smiled. "Look here," he said gently. "The kingdom of heaven is like these seeds." The disciples gathered closer, curiosity glowing in their eyes. "When a seed is planted," Jesus said, "it disappears into the earth. The ground covers it. Days pass. Nothing seems to happen. But deep below, in silence, life begins." The disciples listened, watching his hand trace circles in the soil. The morning air felt sacred, every word like water to their souls. "Faith," he said, "is like this seed. You cannot see it grow, yet it does, not by striving, not by fear, but by trust." A butterfly drifted past, its wings shining in the sun. The disciples followed its path with their eyes, smiling softly. "The soil does not rush the seed," Jesus said. "It simply holds it, believing that in time life will bloom." The wind moved gently through the trees, carrying the scent of earth and wildflowers. A deep peace filled the garden. Every leaf seemed to listen, every petal seemed to breathe as heaven whispered through creation's quiet song. So too must your heart trust, Jesus said. Even when you do not see the growth, believe, for love is working beneath the surface. The disciples nodded slowly. Some smiled, others closed their eyes, feeling the truth settle like sunlight within. The garden of trust had begun to bloom, not only in the soil, but in the hearts of all who listened.
Jesus sat upon a smooth stone beneath an olive tree. The leaves above him shimmered in the sunlight, whispering softly with the morning breeze. The disciples formed a circle around him, their faces open and eager. He looked at them kindly and began to speak. "The kingdom of God," he said, "is as if a man should scatter seed upon the ground. He sleeps and rises night and day, and the seed sprouts and grows, though he does not know how." The disciples listened closely. The sound of rustling leaves mingled with his voice, calm and warm as the earth itself. "The earth produces by itself," he continued. "First the blade, then the ear, then the full grain in the ear. And when the grain is ripe, he harvests it with joy, for the time has come." A long pause followed. The wind slowed, as if creation itself waited for the meaning to sink in. Matthew broke the silence. "Master," he asked softly, "does the seed know that it will become a tree?" Jesus smiled. "No," he said gently. "The seed does not think of what it will be. It simply rests in the soil and lets the light and rain do their work. That is trust. Trust is not noise or striving. It is quiet surrender, the kind that lets grace do what we cannot see." Jesus picked up a small seed from the ground and placed it in his palm. He held it up for all to see. "This seed is small, yet within it lives a forest. You may not understand its power, but God does, and He never forgets what He plants." The disciples looked at the seed, their eyes reflecting the sunlight. It seemed to glow in his hand, not with magic, but with meaning. "So it is with your faith," he continued. "When you plant it through prayer, kindness, or forgiveness, it may seem small, but in heaven's timing, it grows into something mighty, shelter for others, and rest for your own soul." The sound of the wind through the garden grew softer. The fragrance of flowers filled the air. A deep, wordless peace settled over them. They began to see that every quiet act of faith, every unseen prayer, was a seed in the garden of trust, and God was the gardener. Jesus looked toward the horizon, where the fields shimmered in morning light. "Let your faith rest," he whispered, "and let it grow in peace." The sun began to drift lower in the sky, turning the garden golden. Shadows stretched gently across the earth, soft and peaceful as the close of prayer. The disciples lingered beneath the trees, their hearts quiet, filled with wonder and stillness. The scent of the soil and flowers surrounded them like a hymn. Jesus stood once more beside the garden bed, where the tender shoots swayed in the light wind. He knelt down and placed his hand upon the ground. "Father," he whispered, "you make all things grow. In your timing, every seed finds its place. Every heart learns to trust. Every soul finds peace." The air seemed to shimmer around him, gentle and full of warmth. The disciples bowed their heads, feeling the presence of something holy. "Remember this," Jesus said softly. "Faith is not hurried. It listens. It waits. It believes that even in silence, God is working." A small bird landed upon a nearby branch, singing one last song before nightfall. Its voice carried through the still garden like a final blessing of the day. The garden glowed in the soft amber of evening. The leaves whispered of peace. The earth itself seemed to hum with quiet joy. Jesus rose to his feet, brushing the soil from his hands. "Let your hearts be as this soil," he said, "soft enough to receive, strong enough to hold, and patient enough to bloom." The disciples smiled, each one feeling a new calmness take root within. It was as though light had been planted in their hearts. The wind carried a cool hush across the fields, and the first stars began to appear. The world grew quiet, wrapped in the stillness of trust. "Come," Jesus said softly, "let us rest, for even the earth sleeps before it grows again." Together they left the garden, walking slowly beneath the deepening sky. The sound of their footsteps faded into the rhythm of the night. Behind them, the seeds rested in silence, waiting, breathing, trusting. The stars above shone brighter now, as if heaven itself watched over every growing thing. Peace settled over the land, deep and endless. And so the day ended in the garden of trust, with faith planted, love rooted, and hope quietly blooming beneath the soil.